Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to make over a few items and we're going to start with this little silver plated tray. And I'm going to make some wall decor from this. So first I'm going to clean it with some alcohol, and don't worry, it isn't real silver. But I love the detail in this one, and I love the shape of it, so I'm going to use it to make some wall decor. So I'll clean it with alcohol good first, and then I'm going to give it 2 coats of the color buttercream. And I know I use that color a lot lately, but it's just kind of become my go-to because I don't feel like it's too yellow, but it's not too white. So I'm using just a regular fan brush here. I use just cheap brushes, usually from Walmart, and I think this one just happens to be a fan brush. And I like to use those because they don't seem to leave as many streaks. But obviously you can use any brush you want here. So once I let this dry, I want some distressing on it, but I don't want to change this color. So if I were to use a brown wax or even a glaze, then it would make it too dark. So I'm just going to kind of get creative in distressing this one. And I have this distress ink here. It's called Distress Oxide. And people use it mostly in paper crafts, but I just happen to have it. And I'm just going to kind of very lightly rub this across these high areas, and in places I'm just kind of dabbing it because I don't want to overdo it, but I want to since I'm not going to be able to get wax or something to settle down in the low areas for fear of changing the color, then I'm just kind of hitting these high spots. And I've got 2 different colors of Distress Oxide here, and this is just a darker and a lighter color. So I'm just kind of playing with it and getting the distress that I want. And I didn't mention that I did seal this chalk paint with a clear coat before I did this. And I'm probably going to go back and spray a little bit more over it where I've done this distress. I don't think I'll have a problem with it coming off since it's just going to be wall decor, but I want to make sure. And here I'm just kind of rubbing this a little bit and just slightly blending that. And I did take some glaze and just very lightly using a wet wipe with just a little bit of that brown wax on it. Then I'm just very lightly going over this. And I have a clean one handy so that if I get too much, I can wipe that down. Because I wanted to make it look a little bit aged, but like I said, I didn't want to change this color. So if you're unsure, put just a little bit on a wet wipe, and then, like I said, have one handy that is clean so that you can wipe any excess off, like I'm doing here. And then I decide on this one that I want a little extra distressing. So I'm just using a regular ink pad. And this is just a brown ink pad. And it's not the distress ink, it's just straight ink. And I'm just very lightly adding some distress on a little bit of the areas, not the whole area, but just hitting some of those high spots because I wanted the distress to really show up. And then I mentioned that this is going to be a wall hanging, so because of that, I needed a hanger. So I know this is very unsightly to put these, to drill these holes in the center, but I'm not going to worry about that because I'm going to be covering that up. So I thought, since I'm going to be covering it up, then I'm using, this is just a sheer cloth ribbon, and that's what I'm going to use as the hanger. I was going to use a wire, but I was afraid that what I'm going to be putting on this, that might show through. So I'm just using a silk sheer ribbon, and it's going to hold the weight because this is a very lightweight plate. So I'm not worried at all that it might not hold. And then I just cut that off, and then I'll have that hanger there. And I'm not even worrying about the back of this that much because, and I like to, when I'm painting a silver plate item, I like to leave the back if I can, because I just like for people to know what's under that. But because I'm keeping this one myself, then I definitely want it left. So now I'm going to show you, and if you have not seen one of my videos where I make these little rosettes, little cloth rosettes from strips of fabric. I just tear up strips of fabric, and that's what I make them with. And in this case, I'm using two different pieces. One is a little bit darker white than the other one. So the reason I want to do that is because these flowers are going to be a little bit bigger, and so I wanted them to be a little bit bulkier, but I wanted two different colors here, or slightly different colors. That way, when you twist them together like that, you're going to get some darker showing and some lighter showing. And I feel like that's going to make the dimension in the flowers look more like flowers. So that's why I'm doing it. And I'm just kind of twisting whichever way I want that to show. Like if I want a little bit of that darker to show through, then in a certain area, then I just twist it one way to make that show. And if maybe I'm showing too much of the whiter versus the more tan, then I just twist it the other way. So I'm just playing with it to see to create the look that I want. And if I didn't mention, I've just cut me a piece of fabric, and the size really doesn't matter. It's just, it makes these flowers easier if you make them on something. I freehand them a lot without anything on the back, but especially if you're a beginner at making these, it just makes it a lot easier. And if you decide that maybe you want your flower bigger than you have your fabric, and you run out of fabric and you still got string left or fabric left, and you want to keep going, then instead of gluing to the fabric, then you're just going to glue right on the edge of the flower, if that makes sense. So you can just keep going. But I'm out here, and so I'm going to cut that fabric away, and then that will be my flower. These are so simple to make. I think the worst issue that I've ever had with them is you are going to touch that glue. So I wouldn't use a high temp glue gun, but I always use a low temp glue gun anyway, so that's not an issue for me. And now I'll make another one to show you, and now you can do like I did on the first one and use two strips of fabric together, or you can just use one. If I'm doing a small flower, then I'm more likely to use just one. If I'm doing a large flower, then I'll use two like this, and sometimes I'll even use a bulkier fabric so that it makes my flower more chunky. So it's all a matter of preference. You can use any fabric you want here. Obviously, some fabrics will tear and some won't. So I like to, when I can, use fabrics that will tear, because that really cuts down on the time. And I like the frayed look that it gives the flower anyway. But you can make these any size that you want. And these are going to go on this tray, but I'm going to do a lot of these in very small, because I'm going to be doing a lampshade later that I'll be putting them on, and I want small ones. And they don't have to be uniform size, but I want several small ones. And as you can see, it doesn't take very long at all to make these. Even the larger ones, if you're using a chunkier fabric, then they go really quickly. So when you get to the end there, you just cut that off and secure it on at the end, and you have your little rose. Now I'm going to show you how I make just a smaller one with just one strip of fabric. So it's the same technique. You just twist it one way, and then every now and then you twist it back the other way, and that just kind of helps add some dimension. It's hard to remember if you twisted one way or the other, so just twist one way for a little bit and then twist the other way. It doesn't have to be exact. I've known people to do them and twist them in the same direction the whole way through. I just feel like it gives them better dimension if you change directions every now and then. And then when you get your flower the way you want it, then you just cut off that excess. I'm just using paper on this one. But you can use anything on the back to make it easier. Like I said, paper is probably the easiest. And, you can glue that paper to any project that you could glue the cloth to. So that just makes it, I feel like, easier to make these. And here's why I was able to drill through that and not worry about the hole showing, because I'm going to glue this doily on here, and that will be the base for adding my flowers. So when you're gluing this doily on, you just have to be really careful where you put your dots of glue, because you don't want it showing through this doily. So I just glue directly onto the doily instead of my plate, so that I make sure that I don't have any showing through. And then once I get that glued on, then I can start adding my flowers, which is also going to add glue to help hold this on. So don't worry with getting it glued completely. Mainly around the edges is what you need to make sure, because you're going to be adding some glue by gluing these little roses on anyway. So now it's just a matter of how many you want on here and how you want to place them. And it sometimes it's a struggle to figure it out, but just do what you feel like looks good to you. Now I want to keep this plate neutral because there was an area in my bathroom between my mirrors that my husband and I both felt like was an area that needed something, but it didn't need something that was overpowering at all. So I wanted to keep this a very neutral palette, so I'm just kind of gluing these on, and I'll add some leaves also, but I'm also going to keep those in a neutral color. And I decided here that I wanted another flower besides the ones that I had. I needed a different size, so I thought this would be an opportunity to make a lace flower. So instead of using just regular strips of fabric, I'm using some lace here. And I'm just twisting that lace together, and I'm using 2 strands just to make it bulkier. And you don't have to use expensive lace here. This I actually thrifted, but when I don't find thrifted lace, then I just take curtain panels, just cheap lace curtain panels, and I cut those into strips, and it works just as well as using your lace fabric here, or lace trim here. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this to see what size I need in that area, and I guess that's the biggest thing, is getting these arranged right. And if you don't have the flowers the size you need, just make them. And you can even make them directly onto the plate. So where you were gluing onto some sort of backing, the paper or a little piece of cloth, you can just decide where you want the center of your flower on this plate and put your little dot of glue and start building it directly onto the plate. But you just have to make sure when you do that you know that's where you want your flower. So that's why I'm just kind of building it without a back. And then I'm cutting little leaf-shaped pieces of fabric, and I'm using tea towel for this, coffee stained tea towel. And I'm cutting little leaf shapes after I get my flowers on, and just kind of tucking them into areas, just putting a dab of glue and just kind of tucking them in the areas around some of the flowers, just to give it the illusion of leaves. And those don't have to be perfect at all. Just almost like a rounded triangle. And then I just pinch the base of it together and tuck that back in. And as you can see here, just a little piece of, it's like a triangle, I guess, except it's rounded. And you just kind of pinch the center of it together when you glue it down, just to give it a little bit of lift. And I'll zoom this in just so you can see what I'm talking about here. Just a little piece of fabric, and I just kind of pinch it together to look like a leaf and tuck it in. And as you can see, it's just kind of a leaf shape, and then I just kind of tuck it in, and I would make it a short, fat leaf so that you can kind of pinch it together and give it some dimension. But I didn't want my leaves to overpower my flowers, so that's why I'm doing these tiny. And I generally like to do flowers in threes. I feel like it just looks better. But in this case, I decided I needed another one, so I added another one there on the bottom. Now this would be pretty displayed on a plate rack, or like I said, I'm going to be hanging it on the wall. But I think it turned out really cute, and I like that it's neutral. And then for the next items, I'm going to be doing some more bottles. And again, these are going in my bathroom. So I'm sorry if you're tired of the bottles I've been doing, but these need to be made over for my bathroom. So I thought I would just do it on here. And a couple of these are going to be decanters. And I just like the look of them, so I feel like it'll make some pretty shelf decor. So I painted this one 2 coats of the color buttercream, and now I'm making some colored wax. So I've just got about a teaspoon of clear wax here, and then I put a little bit of the color sea glass in it, and it will add just enough of that color to this to settle down into this little detail, and add just enough to make it go with my bathroom. But anyway, I said that a couple of these are going to be decanters, and then one is just a regular bottle that I'll kind of turn into a decanter. But I'm just painting this on and wiping it off, and once I get that done, then I'll just glue some lace around the top and add some decoupage. And what I'm decoupaging on this is just one little image from a rice paper piece that I had, and I'll try to link that in the description, but I just cut a small section of that decal off to decoupage on. And now I'm using just regular distress ink here, and I'm using a stamp just because I needed something to apply it with, and this stamp just gave me something to distress with. And it's a flower, I think, that I'm using, but obviously I don't want a flower on these. I'm just kind of using it to brush across the high spots. And then here's that little decal from that rice paper, and I'm decoupaging that on, and then I'm keeping this one kind of simple. And then for the next one, it's just a regular bottle. But I'm going to turn it into a decanter just by adding, or something that looks like a decanter, by adding just a little knob, a little drawer pull knob. And I thrifted several of these, and they're really not a design that I would use on much, but I'm just going to paint this one, and this particular one has some detail on top, so I like the way that looks. And this is the rice paper that I used the small decal off. So I'm just cutting this design as close as I can to the image here, and as neatly as I can around the edge. Sometimes I tear these out, but for this one I wanted it to have more of a precise look. So I'm just decoupaging that straight onto the bottle. And if you've never decoupaged with rice paper, it is a very forgiving paper. You don't have to worry about wrinkles, and I don't feel like it tears easily, but it gives a real smooth finish. And then once I let this dry, then I'm going to use some of the brown wax, but I'm putting it on with a wet wipe. So I'm just dabbing around the bottom because I want some extra aging around the bottom. And then I can kind of watch and make sure that I don't get too much on this way. And instead of trying to use that wax over the entire piece, then I can just kind of concentrate on certain areas. And I'm going to do the same thing around that image that I put on the front, because I feel like it'll make it look more like it's always been there. And then of course age that too. So I just kind of dab it around, and then I take my wipe, the clean end of my wipe, and just kind of dab it off. And so I just very carefully on this bottle in different areas just dab it on and then dab it off. I don't like to wipe it off because then it just takes away the look that I'm going for. So I rub in places, but for the most part I'm just dabbing, and I do that around the top and just kind of here and there on the bottle, and I really like the look that gives. And then I do the same thing on the lid, and I don't have to, or on the knob at the top, and I don't have to be as careful with it because I don't mind if it's a little bit darker. And then all that I'm going to do to the top of this one is just put one little piece of lace just around that the top, because I don't want to see that little screw on area, so the threaded area. So I just kind of glue this around, and then this bottle will be finished. And then the third bottle is another decanter. So this one, I forget what the kind of glass this one is called, but it used to bring money, but it doesn't anymore. And I'm sorry if it's something that you collect. I don't want to offend anyone, but I don't like that look. So I'm going to paint over this. But first, I'm mixing some of the color buttercream in with just a little. I barely had any of this sea glass left in this jar. So as you know, the darker color will overpower the lighter color. So I added more of the buttercream than I had in the sea glass. And here is that bottle. And like I said, I'm sorry if I offend anyone by painting over this, but it has to be done for me to use it. So I'm giving this a couple colors, coats of this color. So it's the sea glass in a much lighter version of the sea glass. And now I'm going over this one with brown wax, because with all these bottles, after I painted them, I sprayed some clear matte finish on them. And this one I was brave enough to paint that directly on, because I really wanted some of that glaze to settle down in this texture. So I kind of braved it, but kept my wet wipe handy. And it gave it just enough. I was really pleased with the look that I got. and I don't know if you can tell on this bottle, but when I mixed that sea glass and buttercream, I didn't even stir it up that well. And it kind of gave me more dimension in the color, which I wanted. And then adding this glaze over the top was really the look that I was looking for. And obviously I do the same thing on the top. And then I wanted some extra dimension, so I wanted some distress, and I didn't want to sand on this or even wet distress it, because I didn't want it to go down all the way to the glass. So I used my little inking trick on this also, and just kind of rub that ink on the high spots, or actually on some of the high spots, and then that gave me the look that I wanted. But then I forgot that I did this little stamp on here with that distress ink, because I wanted it to be a really faint stamp. And I guess I probably could have done without this one. I didn't really care for this stamp. And so I took a wet wipe later once it dried and kind of lightened it some. But because I had that stamp on the front here, I felt like it needed something all around. So I just took this little corner rose and just stamped it right at the top of each one of these. And this, or each of the sides. And this one is, it's risky to do this because you've got this wooden stamp, but I felt like this area was flat enough that it might work, and it did work. So once I got the distress that I wanted on this one and put a little piece of lace around the top of it, then this one was finished. And I really like the way they display together, and I like that they look aged, but I don't feel like they're overdone. So I wanted it to have somewhat of a shabby chic look, but not a French country look at all. So I think that I got the look that I wanted. And then, so I thrifted this lamp, and this lampshade was in terrible condition, and it was so dirty. So I planned on, first I planned on cleaning it and just painting the shade. And then once I started to clean it, it just fell apart. So I tried to strip it completely, wasn't able to get all of it off. So I just cut away everything that I couldn't get off. I just cut away the excess, and now I'm just going to cover this up. And I thought I would work just right on the lamp. My plan was to use this little lamp and not paint it because I hated to paint it. But then when I went to do my shade, I just wasn't liking the way the shade looked with this lamp. So I ended up changing the lamp. I had another one that would go much better with this little vignette anyway. And so I'm just kind of working off this lamp, but this is not the one that I'm going to use. So I just took a piece of lace and covered my lampshade, and then I let it hang down about 4 inches all around. I cut it where I had about 4 inches hanging past the lampshade, if that makes sense. And then I cut them in about 1/2-inch strips up about 4 inches to the bottom of that lampshade. And I know that's odd, but I'm going to take 2 of those little strips that I've cut and tie them around the bottom of the lampshade all the way around. And seems odd, I know, but I was kind of experimenting here, and as it turns out, it did work. While I was cutting, though, I tied one on each side to kind of help keep it in place, to make sure that I didn't let it move. So that's why some of those are tied. But then I just take 2 of the little pieces, and I put one on the inside of the bottom of the shade and one on the outside, and then just tie that in a knot. And I do that all the way around. My plan was to to leave those hanging some, but trim them more uniform. And then as I started to do this, I wasn't sure I wanted that. So in the end, I ended up cutting those off. But I just tied them secure all the way around, making sure that my lace fits the shade. And it seems harder than it is. It really wasn't that hard. The biggest thing is I tied one on 4 sides first before I did the rest of the cutting. Like I said, I wanted to make sure that I kept it in place the way it needed to be. And then once I got all these tied, and this is where I decide I want to cut all that off the bottom when I'm putting these little rosettes on. But that's what I made all the small rosettes for. So I'm just placing them all around the bottom, and they don't have to be the same size. You could make them all exactly the same size, which I feel like would be hard, but I think it looks just as good to use different sizes. Just make sure that you kind of alternate your sizes somewhat. But I just glue those to the bottom all the way around, and that helps secure the shade. And then, like I said, I cut all that flush. And here is the lamp I decided to use, and it already was this color, which was great, but I wanted to deepen that color a little and add some dimensions. So I mixed up some of my sea glass in the color sea glass in the clear wax, and now I'm just kind of going over this with a sea glass colored wax. Now I use Dixie Belle products, but I've had a lot of questions about waxes, and I really like all of them. And the more liquidy waxes I don't so much use, because it takes your paint off too much, and sometimes you want that if you want to really distress a piece. But if you don't really want to distress it, then it's a good idea to use more of a creamy wax. And now I'm just taking my little ink pad, and this is just regular brown ink, and just dabbing that on. Today's the first day that I've used this technique, and it's really working out for me, so you're probably going to see me doing this more. But that's all I had to do to that lamp, and here's the shade once I've cut all that away. And then I'm going to put this little doily, just happens to fit right on the top of this. So I want to secure this on, so I just thread some sheer thin ribbon around the outer edge of the doily. I used sheer ribbon here because I didn't really want this to show up that well, so I just tied it around, and that holds it secure and doesn't change up the look that much. But I wanted to finish off this bottom, and so I glued some of this lace that I've cut from this damaged doily, and just glued that right to the center, because I didn't get this filmed here. I'm showing you what I did. I just took this that I removed from that and glued it right to the inside at the bottom of those roses there, and then I felt like that added just enough to this little lamp. And I think that gave it a really shabby chic look without being too overdone. So now all these items will be used in my bathroom except this lamp. But I don't think I'll have a problem selling this, because I sell lamps very easily, and especially when they're shabby chic. And then there's everything displayed together. And you'll see all this, or most of this, in my bathroom makeover video when I get around to finishing that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. God bless you and your family.